Okay, so just a little bit of a story about why this talk and why I'm here. I do some APL consulting, as John mentioned, on the side, and I work, my day job is at a company called BCA Research in Montreal. In fact, Paul Chow is the IT manager at BCA. He's here with me and basically sponsoring me here. But one of my other clients happened to casually mention in passing about 2 years ago that he's a programmer himself in VBA, I believe. He happened to casually mention that he had a tool for reading and writing Excel spreadsheets without Excel, and my ears perked up, and I said, "Oh, that's interesting. How does that work?" And then he explained it to me, and he said it was a .NET entity, and I said, "Oh, that's interesting. Well, I use APL, and it uses .NET, or it can use .NET. Maybe we could work something out there." So in talking to him, he thought, "Yeah, maybe I could provide that for you, but there would be a cost involved because it included a lot of other things, and he had to. It wasn't a packaged product. It wasn't documented, and it was actually a proprietary thing for his company. So there was a lot of hurdles there." I happened to mention that to Morton last year at Eastbourne, and I said, "Would that be something of interest, do you think?" And he said, I think it was immediately or a few minutes later, turned around and said, "Well, actually, there's a thing in Syncfusion that does that." And I said, "Really?" So all of a sudden, it dawned on me that we had a tool already that can can read and write Excel, and that interested me. So I went on to do some more work on that. However, I went back to work, put it aside for a while, a few months, and then I thought about it again, and I couldn't quite remember how to get Syncfusion hooked and .NET working together. So I turned to my usual source for that kind of information, Daniel. I said, "Dan, do you know how I could get this Syncfusion thing working within APL?" And he thought about it, I guess, for a few days, and then in his usual manner, didn't really answer the question, but gave me back something that was totally different, but actually did the job anyway. So he gave me back a couple of Dyalog scripts, which contain some .NET entities in them, not the Syncfusion ones, but something else. And that opened my eyes to the fact that, oh, well, there's other ways to do this. It's not just Syncfusion here. We can do lots of other things. So that's the genesis of this talk. And then in discussing that with Morton, he suggested bringing it here. So why Excel? Well, if you Google around a bit and ask it for things like the importance of Excel, you'll come up with quotes like this. I don't really know who this James Kwok guy is, but from what I've read in a couple of seconds, he's some sort of prominent blogger, and he believes Excel is the most powerful thing ever. And it's perhaps the most used program in the business world. He may be right, but I think we can all agree we all use Excel, and it's a very powerful tool, and it pops up all over the place. In my own particular work at BCA, it is totally indispensable. We use it to keep track of everything, lists of all sorts of things, user profiles, data retrieval information. We're in the business, by the way, of analyzing the global economy and producing analytical information and reports about that. So we are constantly collecting information about global economies and then analyzing that and putting out our own information about that. So a lot of the I/O involved in that is Excel driven. Our data sources such as Bloomberg and Reuters provide data in CSV. And when I say Excel here, I'm including CSV because basically that's one of the interchange methods. And typically data is edited in CSV via Excel. So we download a lot of data from those sources, and it comes to us as CSV. They also provide downloading tools, which are add-ins to Excel, for us to get their data. And we have other analytical tools, which are Excel add-ins, working on similar data. We produce a lot of charts in Dyalog APL using Quad WC. And I'm happy to report we're now making the transition to Sharpplot, and we're near a beta phase for that, I'd say. But in the meantime, there are certain charts that we just don't do in APL for various reasons. We just haven't coded that particular kind of chart yet, for example. So instead, we turn to Excel because, of course, it has charting. Similar for stats. There's various statistical procedures we want to run. We haven't coded those in APL yet either, so we turn to Excel or other tools such as MATLAB. When we have information to give to ourselves, present to ourselves, tell people about things that need attention, what do? We dump it in an Excel spreadsheet and send it to them. And finally, something perhaps a little more of my own invention. We do a lot of automated activity. We automate our downloads for data and so on. All of that is, as much as possible, is what I call table-driven, meaning somewhere there's a table that basically drives the process. It tells the process, for example, which data series to download on which day and so on. So again, we store all that information in Excel. So in short, it's extremely important. It's everywhere in our company. And for example, just the data collection process, we are downloading thousands, if not tens of thousands, of CSV files every night and bringing those into our local database in APL. So it's so therefore why are there some issues here? We have a need for speed often, and we definitely have a need for automation. And when it comes to automation, there are various issues, glitches and gotchas. We occasionally run into some incompatibility issues between our version of Excel and the coding we've done and APL. As you may know, you can exhaust resources by running Excel too much, and you know, it takes some effort to avoid that kind of thing. Similarly, there are automation issues with pop-ups when you try to interact with files that are busy and so on. So these things happen, and therefore they confound the process of automation to some degree. So that's why I'm interested in looking at this concept of Excel and XML. So as you may know, around in the early 2000s, Microsoft started investigating this itself, and eventually in the release of Microsoft Office 2007, they adopted an XML-based format for their document files. So what is that exactly? It's a zipped archive, meaning an archive of zip files, compressed files in each spreadsheet, Word document, or PowerPoint document. So it's a collection of zip files. And within those, there are various elements that need to be teased out. So there's a they follow what is called the standard ISO standard for that. And has the world adopted it? Definitely yes. There's you can Google or go to the Wikipedia page that lists various software products that have adopted this format and use it. There's a comparison page there that's interesting, comparing spreadsheet document that use this product. That doesn't list everything. There's other components that aren't mentioned there in the C# and VB world and so on. And they all generally adhere to this standard and have exploited it to make applications and other programming interfaces. So let's just review why wouldn't we just use COM and not worry about that? Well, I think the number one thing is automation. Microsoft itself, the quote in italics is in the middle, is from Microsoft themselves. They say, in fact, Microsoft Office was not designed for automation. It was designed as a client product, and it lacks certain features that are necessary for automation. So you have it right there from the horse's mouth. That, therefore, is our reason for going forward and looking at other reasons. And we had a talk yesterday by Marcos, who said he was running into problems with COM as well. So yes, there are some performance issues there, and the other things I mentioned. So what are our options beyond that? Well, it depends. Are you looking for an application, or are you looking for a plug-in to your application? And typically us in this room, we're probably in the latter camp. Do you need a UI or not, in other words? So there are some products, applications that give you a UI. Probably the top one that you might be familiar with is this thing called Open Office. And by the way, Open Office is not to be confused with Office Open. The top right. because I don't know why exactly it turned out that way, but OpenOffice is a standalone application with a user interface that can read and write Excel in a thing it calls Calc. You also have, of course, as you probably know, Google Docs. There are various Android apps. I carry one around in my pocket here, and there's a spreadsheet right there. So it's easy enough to do. There's also a thing called the Microsoft OneDrive. Has anybody used that at all? It's basically Microsoft's in the cloud version of Office. So it does Excel online in the cloud. Seems to work. I've actually used it, or at least read a spreadsheet or two in it, and so that's out there. So there's lots of things that are spawned from this process. But we are the programmers of the world, and we want an API that we can plug into our product. So the first one to, obviously, that, as I mentioned, came to my attention was the Syncfusion tool. It's called XLsIO, or Essential XLsIO. You can find it in your Dyalog folder under Syncfusion. If you look hard enough there, you'll find some XLsIO elements. And as it says, it's a .NET library that generates fully functional Microsoft spreadsheets in native XML format, et cetera, et cetera. So we already have it. All we got to do is figure out how to use it. And in fact, you don't have to, luckily somebody's done the hard work for us. You don't have to go and actually study XLsIO and its documentation, which I found a little bit opaque. A fellow named Pierre Gilbert, who's a Montrealer, I had the pleasure of meeting Pierre back in June, actually, and he's not a professional programmer. He's actually a chemical engineer, I believe, who does a bit of programming on the side, and he does it for the purpose of his running his company, apparently. He went off and built a what I think is an excellent toolkit plug into Dyalog APL called SFXL. You can find it on the APL wiki, and he's built some very nice little functions like this. So get value to read values from a range on a spreadsheet, and so on. He's also got some interesting formatting tools. It's deployed as a namespace, so it's a Dyalog script that you simply load up as a namespace. It does data and text only, and by that I mean it doesn't do charts, it doesn't do pivot tables and that sort of thing, but it does the data and text columns very nicely. And it has some speed issues. If you start reading very large spreadsheets with thousands and thousands of rows, you run into some speed performance issues. However, he has hooked in, interestingly, a thing called the use of a thing called data table. And a data table, as I've learned from studying this now, I had no idea, is a .NET entity. It's basically an in-memory snapshot of some data, a table of data. And so it has certain features that Dyalog has put some effort into to help speed up this process, and Pierre has exploited those. So I'll get to that in more detail in a minute. But let's set that aside for a moment. What does the C# Visual Basic and Visual Studio people do? Well, if you Google around enough in that, you'll find that basically almost uniformly they use something called this, the Microsoft Open XML SDK. And you can go to this website and grab it. It's again a .NET DLL tool, and it, as it says, is built on something called system.io.packaging, and it's basically what the C# people are using as their plug-in tool. So you can find a lot of code out there using this thing. And in my workshop on Thursday, towards the end of it, we'll be exploring this tool and figuring out how to plug it into APL as well. So basically, it's a simple download. There's actually two elements that you might be interested in. There's the DLL itself, and then there's a thing called the tool. And the tool is really kind of a browser, if you like, into the which allows you to drill down into the XML structure of a file. So it gives you a view of the content, or rather the structural content of your Excel file, and it does something else that's interesting that I haven't actually explored yet. I just found this last night. It says you can generate Open XML SDK code based on your document content, so you'll be able to regenerate that document later. I'm interested in that, but that's an aside. So this tool is just an exploratory tool. It's a good starter thing, but other than that, you really need to get to using the DLL in the APL. So this is one of the conceptual diagrams that I've discovered that gives you an idea of what the content of a Excel spreadsheet really looks like now. These bubbles are essentially XML files, and they have relationships, the blue lines. So you have one XML file that pertains to the workbook itself, and then you have others that pertain to the individual spreadsheets or worksheets, pardon me, in the workbook. And then there are some ancillary items that take care of things like styles and charts and so on. So it's a collection of things that has a particular organization that you need to understand if you want to go further with this. So I've mentioned some documentation that you can follow up on that with. But in reality, as I said, that thing that Dan provided me with, for starters, one of the things in it was a script he called zip.dialog. And when you run that and look at the methods in that, one of them is zip.entries. You give it the name of your spreadsheet, your Excel file, and it returns the content of those XML files within that. So it simply unzips the package, if you like, and shows you what's in there. So as you can see, you've got the workbook XML here, or pardon me, here. You've got the individual worksheets. There's sheet 2, there's sheet 1. There's also something important here called shared strings, which I'll get to later. So it gives you a little bit of an inspection of the what's in there. Leaving that aside for a moment, getting back to the Open XML SDK, when you deploy that on your machine, you have this DLL here to call. So you put that into your quad using statement to use it. And from there you have access to those methods and properties. Okay. Let's talk a little bit more about that product. It is integrated, and or things like it have been built and are integrated into various products. And in particular, for some of us, perhaps, or me at least, that's of interest is the fact that MATLAB and R have some hooks. I'm not quite sure if they're using the Open XML SDK or have maybe some cases they built their own tool using other .NET facilities. But that's to be explored. But the general idea is this is a popular thing to do, and why shouldn't we do it? This blog is highly useful for those who are starting on this process. I found it very useful to look at. It contains a lot of startup information. Now back to SFXL, the package that Pierre Gerbert has built for us using Syncfusion. As I said, there was some issues with timing, so I did some get values on the used range of a number of increasingly larger worksheets. So the number of rows down here starts to get into the thousands, and as you can see, the time it took to get that data back into APL took longer and longer. The dotted lines are kind of what you would expect. If you double the number of rows, does the time double? So it's worse than that in the first case. But then, as I said, he has hooked in this thing called a data table and some magic that Dyalog has provided for that. And lo and behold, the curve goes the other way. You can start reading very large spreadsheets with relatively less time. So that's an obviously highly useful feature. And let's explore that concept of a data table a little further. If you go into the Syncfusion documentation, you find eventually this information. So there's the issue with a data table, I should mention, is that you get all the data, but the reason it's faster is that it does not analyze the data type of every cell. So that's why this curve is going like this. Once you start getting into thousands and thousands of rows and cells, what I think is happening is internally there's a loop there that's going through every cell and figuring, okay, is this character or is it numeric? And if it's numeric, what is it? So there's a process going on there that's figuring out the data type, whereas a data table has certain features that allow you to skip that process essentially. And essentially it's looking at the first row and determining the data type of the columns based on what it sees there. So then it goes on and just reads the data in a simple format, and then probably does some formatting at the end to turn it into numbers if necessary. So obviously a much faster way to do things. Now, as it turns out, 5 years ago, who knew, Dyalog built a couple of I-beams that deal with this process. And they've published something called the Dyalog Technical Note Number 1 on that. And these I-beams will do a set or a get of a data table. And Pierre hooked that into a couple of functions in his SFXL suite, and they work like magic. So it does what I would say rapid conversion of the source data to APL arrays. So the compromise is on data types, as I said, because as long as your spreadsheets are all the same data type in columns, which of course is very often the case, you're good to go. So he's got a couple of functions with a 2 at the end, get number 2, get text 2, and so on, that will employ the data type method. And interestingly, he didn't cover this, but when I started looking this, I thought, well, I discovered that there's something called a select method on a data table. So I wondered about that, and I said, I wonder if we could do a select as we're bringing that data into APL. So in other words, you've got a very large worksheet. You don't want all the rows. You just want a certain number of rows based on the content of them. Could I do a query on that data as it comes into APL? And sure enough, you can. I haven't quite polished that off yet, but it is doable. Back to this one, the Open XML SDK for a moment. Are there any issues with it? Well, probably, but I haven't explored it fully yet, so it's very complex, and I'm still working through it. I'm guessing that it will have similar performance issues if you make it read every cell and every data type of each cell. But I haven't, frankly, produced some code that does that yet. But I've seen some discussion in various blogs and so on that allude to that fact. I find that, I was just having a discussion with John D. about this, I find that it's easy to find examples in C# that will do this kind of work for us, but plugging them into APL is a bit of a challenge, at least for me. So it'd be nice if we could do that a little easier. They also mentioned, some of the blogs and so on that I've mentioned, mentioned this thing called streaming. So that's another concept of grabbing data from a data source and manipulating it that I'd like to explore. And it helps you deal with, apparently, with really large files. Now, the overall question is, do we really need this SDK thing? Should we use it if we are just pulling data out of the entire worksheet? And I'm going back to the tool that Dan first gave me. He didn't use this. He didn't use Syncfusion. He had this zip dialog thing which unzipped the package, and then he had another script which basically grabbed each of those XML files, so the worksheet.xml for sheet 1, and then he used good old quad XML to basically break that down into an array that APL can understand. So he already figured out at that point how to circumvent or at least dig into the Excel spreadsheet and grab exactly what was needed without using any of these tools. So that's pretty impressive. And we can modify that and work on it. I think a hybrid solution here might be the way to go. This thing, XML SDK, is probably going to be useful. I haven't got to it yet. when you want to start dealing with things like charts and pivot tables and so on. So it'll help you sort out exactly what's in the in your XML file. So it's a work in progress. When it gets right down to it, here's kind of what it looks like. You can run a method called whatever your object is called .worksheet.outerXML. Gives you back the entire string of XML. And of course, we know how to deal with strings in APL. We can break them down, we can search them, we can do regular expressions on them, etc., etc. So this is what Dan enlightened me to the fact of, is that we can grab all of that XML for a particular worksheet. We've got the data. You probably can't see it very clearly, but in there are numbers and dates and so on from a, that you might typically. Interestingly, you might notice you don't see any text strings, because what the standard does, or what the XML formatting does, is it takes all of the strings, the names, the text strings that you would have in typical cells in Excel, and it puts them all in one XML file on the side called shared strings. And then it puts pointers to those strings in the actual worksheet XML. So you've got a bit of a two-step process there. You've got this, but then you've got to go get the strings and fill in the slots where the pointers are. And it looks something like this. There's the worksheet XML, and it's got a breakdown of rows and C for cell, and then finally a value 42 appears in a cell. So as APLers, we can pretty much parse that and work it out with all of the tools that we have. It's not really difficult. So where am I at with that? There's a few issues that I need to work on, or somebody needs to work on. I'm going to refer here to John Franco's talk, if he's here. Where is he? Yesterday, thank you. He was mentioning that we need to share a bit more. We need to say, I'm not going to do this. Maybe somebody else wants to do this. Thank you. So maybe somebody else wants. I could do it, but if I find the time, I'm not sure I ever will. Work on this further and give us a nice suite of utilities that really does the job in total here. Thank you. So one of the issues that did come up for me and with Dan's tool was the issue of XML, quad XML, pardon me. I found that when I used his tool on very large spreadsheets, I ran into wistful problems, because quad XML, of course, has 5 columns of information. So you've got 5 cells basically for every item. So you've kind of blown up your overhead cost, if you like, is the way I like to think of it, of storing that data in the workspace. So it may not be the best tool to use for very large XML strings. Instead, we have things like epsilon underbar and regular expressions and so on that we could use instead to parse it. You have to deal with the fact that it's XML, therefore there are escape sequences, so that's fairly trivial. You need to do a little bit of reading about the fact that there are there may be, like, not every, you won't find an item for every cell in your spreadsheet in the XML string. Some things are missing, so you've got to fill in the blanks sometimes. Dates, there's some special casing going on for those. Another thing is NAs in an Excel spreadsheet are problematic. I haven't even dealt with the issue of charts and shapes and tables and so on yet, so that's something to be looked at if you wanted to pull that information out or put it in. I haven't, what would be nice would be some tools, a utility suite that allows you to do a selection on ranges by saying I want the data from here to here, or a named range, or entire single worksheets by name and those sorts of things. Obviously that would be fairly simple to build, I think. There's some clever coding that I said goes on for using a data table to pull the data out of a spreadsheet very quickly. I think that could be enhanced a little bit, and have some options built into it for certain types of spreadsheets, and that may be something that's company specific. If your company is always producing worksheets that have particular formatting and data types in particular columns and so on, you can probably do some clever coding here. Writing out from APL to Excel is something I really haven't explored too much yet. It's doable. I have created a spreadsheet or two directly from APL. but I haven't done a lot of work on that. So again, that's another thing that can be customized and worked on. So that's about where I'm at with it. On Thursday, on the workshop, I'll be helping everybody who comes there to go through all of those steps and explore these tools and get your hands on them and play with them. So I think that'll be a lot of fun. And as I said, this is going to be an invaluable tool, I think, for us down the road at BCA and with other clients, perhaps of mine. We all deal with spreadsheets on an ongoing basis, and automation, as I said, is a key thing in many instances that needs to be. This will be nicely a part of. So actually, I'm probably a little early to finish, so I'm just going to say I hope I've shedded some light on the Excel spreadsheet, and I thank you for your attention.